School Integration, The Dream and the Struggle for Education Equality by Megan Rogers
and Sophia Hall. May we begin?
The year is 1923, and two little girls, one African American, the other white, are going to separate preschools in separate neighborhoods, sharing toys with separate friends. Neither of these girls will have the opportunity to get to know each other, or even share a smile for most of their lives. Decades later, this will be an entirely different story for most little girls of different races in the United States.
All of that is true, but it took so much more to reshape the entire American society. In the 1950s and 60s, the right to an equal education was unconstitutionally denied to African Americans by those who had the responsibility and the power to protect all students. Civil rights leaders challenged segregated schooling systems and subpar learning conditions, knowing the risks that their efforts posed. Their passion for this cause outweighed the consequences, and it is the reason why students of all races may attend the schools of their choice today.
You said it was civil rights leaders who changed American society, but you never said who these leaders were or where it all began. During slavery, education was withheld from slaves by their masters, but after slavery ended, the lack of a proper education did not. 55 years after 1896, when the Plessy versus Ferguson case established separate but equal in the United States,
I, 16-year-old Negro Barbara Johns, knew that colored schools were far equivalent to white schools in Farmville, Virginia.
In winter, the school was very cold. When it rained, we would get water through the ceiling, and sometimes we even had to raise our umbrellas to keep the water off of our heads. It was a very difficult setting for trying to learn. Joan Johns, sister of Barbara Johns.
Learning in that environment was a struggle, even with proper materials.
Our high school has the absence of a cafeteria, gymnasium, teacher restrooms, infirmary,
no running water,
and has to put the overflow students in tar pit roof buildings and a school bus.
Joan, my schoolmates and I are going to march down to that county courthouse on April 23rd and show those federal officials that we are fed up with these insufficient schools.
Barbara, what you're doing is going to have severe consequences.
My passion to make a change drowns any fear.
Consequences arrived when the Ku Klux Klan group burned a cross on Barbara's front lawn. However, Barbara's challenge of the status quo was definitely a worthy sacrifice.
In May of 1951, the Davis versus County School Board of Prince Edward County case was filed by the NAACP in federal court.
5 cases, including Barbara's, would become part of the Brown versus Board of Education case. Though only 5 cases were included in BVB, the federal courts would hear over 200 desegregation hearings between 1955 and 1960.
Does the segregation of children in public schools solely on the basis of race,
even though physical facilities and other tangible factors may be equal,
deprive the children of the minority group of equal education opportunities?
We believe that it does, said Chief Justice Earl Warren, and finally, the federal government agreed.
On May 17, 1954, the ruling in Plessy was unanimously overturned by the Supreme Court in Brown versus Board of Education, declaring the separation of schools inherently unequal and ordering lower courts to desegregate schools with all deliberate speed in Brown 2, 1955. Senator Lyndon B. Johnson, a supporter of the United States Constitution, was one of few Southern politicians in support of the decision.
However, a handful were too eager to comply with this new law.
My name is Elizabeth Beckford of Little Rock, Arkansas. At the age of only 15, I endured the most horrendous experience of my life.
Elizabeth was one of 9 students to unsuccessfully integrate the all-white Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas on September 4, 1957. The Supreme Court's order meant nothing to Arkansas Governor Orville Faubus, who specifically ordered no Negroes in the building to Arkansas National Guardsmen.
Governor Faubus said that he, too, would uphold the federal Constitution. He insisted, however, that the National Guard had been called out to prevent violence rather than to block the court order on integration. New York Times.
The governor, who has the responsibility to protect a citizen's rights, directly denied Little Rock 9 and Elizabeth's basic right to an equal education.
No one told me of the new meeting place, so I showed up to the campus without protection against an angry racist mob. After twice failing to enter the school, a surly crowd of segregationists followed me to a bus stop.
Determined to verbally tear Elizabeth limb from limb, you shouted, "Go home! Go home! Get out of here! Lynch her! Lynch her! You've got a better school of your own! Throw her out!"
My first tears fell while sitting on the bus stop bench.
Don't let them see you cry.
White reporter Benjamin Fine whispered to me until I was escorted home.
The rest of the Little Rock 9 had been denied, but with only half the mouths Elizabeth had endured. One of the 9 Negroes 15-year-old Terrence Roberts is a straight A student. He is eager to continue with his schooling so that he can prepare for college. No one urged me to go to a white school, he said. I just feel that Central is a better school than Horace Mann.
The skewed vision of segregationists perceive those for integration as lethal enemies and instigators, though just like Terrence Roberts, all they sought was equal education.
Passionate segregationists assumed they were victorious that day at the grounds of Central. But after news and video reports of Elizabeth's attack had circled the bill, even segregationist leaders were cringing at the photographs.
It is one thing to assert that the Negro children should remain at Dunbar, another to threaten and intimidate them. Editor of the Arkansas Recorder, John Wells. After 22 days, the Little Rock Nine successfully entered Central for good, with help from President Eisenhower.
But Elizabeth's struggle had not ceased.
Miss Huckabee, I can't continue to cope with any more harassment today. Could I finish my studying in your office?
Oh, of course, dear. Take a seat. January 12th. Someone spits on Elizabeth's hand. January 14th. Elizabeth, pushed down onto the stairs, face forward, comes crying into Miss Huckabee's office. January 29th. Elizabeth attacked with spitballs again. January 31st. After girls serenaded her with humiliating songs in gym, Elizabeth asked her grandfather to take her home. Miss Huckabee's journal. The vice principal for girls at Central.
Many wonder who mistreated Elizabeth more, her classmates who physically and verbally tormented her, or much of the staff at Central who allowed the students to get away with this abuse.
Is it not the responsibility of a teacher to protect their students? Some might say 6-year-old Ruby Bridges was in the same boat as Elizabeth after integrating the all-white elementary school, William France, in New Orleans on November 14, 1960.
After Ruby's first 2 days, 5,000 angry segregationists swarmed the ground shouting, 2, 4, 6, 8! We don't want to integrate!
Barbara Henry was the only teacher willing to educate Ruby, but together, neither of them missed a single day of first grade.
When Ruby returned to France in the fall, there was not a protester in sight. She was in a class with 20 other students, and not the only black child in school.
The struggle was far from over, though. This attempt included only 12 students in only 6 schools. The Orleans Parish School Board was forced to abolish the pupil placement law, which restricted the number of integrated students. But by 1964, only 809 African Americans had integrated formerly white schools in the Deep South.
But that was a gigantic leap to accelerate integration.
1940, only 30% of Americans believed that whites and blacks should attend the same schools.
By 1950, that statistic had risen to 49%.
And by 1963, this figure had risen to 62%.
By 1968, 32% of African Americans in the Deep South had attended a majority white school.
And by 1988, this figure had risen to 45% nationwide.
And in 2004, 2 little girls are attending the same preschool. They will one day be the best of friends.
One of these 4-year-olds is white, the other black. They compete on the same softball team and later attend integrated grade schools, still oblivious as to why they have this freedom, though forever in debt to the civil rights leaders who risked their lives for desegregation. Their passion for this cause outweighed the consequences, and it is the reason why students of all races may attend the schools of their choice today. It is now their responsibility to uphold the educational rights of those behind them.
It is very simple but very important. Lift as you climb. As this next generation makes its way through society, they have to remember to lift up the generation behind them. Do important things. Make sure that everyone has access to education, without regard to where they live, or their resources, or their race, or their gender. Open up doors that have been closed. We've done enough to keep the doors open, even though there are forces trying to close it. We need people like you to keep the doors open for the generation that follows. Harvard University law professor, Charles Ogletree.
Why be racist when we all bleed the same color?
Why judge when we haven't even got to know each other?
Discrimination does nothing but set us back. The world is more colorful when it is not only white and black. Anonymous.